while we are celebrating the 125th birth anniversary of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, a person who has written the maximum number of books on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar is none other than Dr. Narendra Jadhav. Dr. Jadhav also served as Vice Chancellor of University of Pune for 3 years. He has written almost 100 research papers. As I said, 37 books, out of which 14 books they are on economics and social issues, including 4 Marathi to his credit, as I mentioned. So please join your hands to welcome once again Dr. Narendra Jadhav, who in his special address will speak to us on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, the architect of modern India.
Distinguished delegates for this conference, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great pleasure as well as an honor to be here this afternoon to speak to you in this great conference. At the very outset, I would like to congratulate Rajkumar Badoleji, the Honorable Minister, who has been responsible for organizing this conference and organizing it so well. This 2-day conference is bringing together experts from different walks of life, and they are expected to throw light on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's monumental contribution that he has made to our country. In this special lecture, I'm going to speak in rapid fire because we are already behind schedule. So in 30 minutes, I'm going to give you a trailer, a panorama of the massive contribution that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar has made to our country. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, as we all know, whenever we think about Dr. Ambedkar, what are the 2 things that come to everybody's mind? First, they think of him as a messiah of Dalits. Of course, he was a messiah of Dalits, but his greatness was not confined to being the messiah of Dalit alone. The other image that comes to our mind is that of principal architect of the Indian Constitution. Again, of course, he was the principal architect of the Indian Constitution, but his greatness was not confined to being a jurist or the constitution maker. He went much beyond that. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was an intellectual colossus who became the social conscience of modern India. And throughout his life, he made phenomenal contribution to so many different walks of life. And while making this contribution, he emerged as an architect of modern India. And that's what we are going to talk about. As we all know, first aspect that we must take into account is Dr. Ambedkar as an economist. A lot of people do not understand this, and the Honorable Chief Minister did speak partly about Dr. Ambedkar's role as an economist. Please understand that Dr. Ambedkar was the most learned economist of India. When you think about who is the most learned economist of our country, it is not Professor Amartya Sen. The most learned economist of our country was Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar had his first degree in Columbia University, United States, and that was the degree of Masters in Economics. And after that, the year was 1915. In the year 1917, Dr. Ambedkar got the degree of PhD in Economics from same Columbia University. And later, he went to England, and from London School of Economics, Dr. Ambedkar got the degree of Doctor of Science also in Economics. While doing his Doctor of Science degree, he also studied law and came back with a barrister's degree. So other than the degree of barrister, all other degrees of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, they were in economics. He was essentially an economist. What is his contribution as an economist? First thing first, Babasaheb Ambedkar wrote 2 very important books on economics. First was his PhD dissertation at the Columbia University. And the title of that dissertation was Evolution of Provincial Finances in British India. What does he do in that book? Basically, what Dr. Ambedkar does in that book is that over the period of more than 100 years, from 1800 to 1910, he critically reviews how the financial relationship developed, evolved between the British central government and the British provinces or states, as we call them. That is the book about. And then he talks about how that relationship should be. So when somebody asks this question now, what is the relevance of that book? Is it only the historical relevance? No, that book is very relevant even today. The same Dr. Ambedkar who wrote that dissertation on the provincial finances in British India also made a provision in our constitution about finance commission. Every 5 years, there is a finance commission appointed in our country. And that finance commission, what is the role of the finance commission? It is basically the divisible pool of resources that the central government has in terms of tax and non-tax revenue. How much of that central government should keep with themselves and how much of that should be given to the states, and what should be the principle governing that allocation. Those are the things which are recommended by Finance Commission. After independence, so far, 14 Finance Commission reports have come out, and you will be surprised that everybody knows about Finance Commission, but what people do not know is that the basic source of reference for all the 14 reports of Finance Commission is the PhD dissertation of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar that was written at that time. Everybody knows about Finance Commission, but they do not know that the father of all the Finance Commission reports was Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. That was the first book, big one. Then the second book is even more important. That the title of that dissertation written for the London School of Economics was The Problem of Rupee, Its Origin and Solution. That book is also very relevant even today. The Problem of Rupee, what does it talk about? Basically what it does is to again take a historical review of how Indian rupee as a mechanism, as a medium of exchange, how Indian rupee has evolved over a period of time, over more than 100 years, how it has evolved. And at the end of the book, Dr. Ambedkar discussed one of the most important problems at that time. The problem was, what is the ideal currency system for a country like India? At that time, there were two extremes that people were talking about. One was gold standard, other was gold exchange standard. To make things very simple, what is the difference between the two? Gold standard means that the gold coins themselves are used as a medium of exchange, whereas in the gold exchange standard, it's not the gold coins that are used as a medium of exchange. Paper currency is used as a medium of exchange, and that is backed by a certain amount of gold kept with the Reserve Bank of India. This debate, when it was going on, one of the greatest economists in the world at that time, and even today, whose economics is being taught, John Maynard Keynes. Keynes studied India and took a position that as far as India is concerned, the ideal currency system is the gold exchange standard. And the reasons he gave was that gold exchange standard is important for India because it offers flexibility. It does not impose undue restrictions on the generation of liquidity on the government. This was the argument made when Lord Keynes was saying that. You can imagine every Tom, Dick and Harry, every small and big economist followed that. The one person who opposed that was young, dynamic Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, who had just returned from the country, from higher education abroad. He took a position that for India, it is not the gold exchange standard that is relevant. What is relevant for India is gold standard in a modified form. And while debating about what the Keynes' argument was, he said that flexibility is correct, that the gold exchange standard has the flexibility. However, that flexibility is a double-edged weapon. It can be good and it can be very bad. It can be good because it does not impose undue restrictions on the government. But it can be very bad because under the gold exchange standard, if the government is irresponsible, then there would be an unbridled, uncontrolled expansion of liquidity. And if there is unbridled, uncontrolled expansion of liquidity, it will create a situation where too much money is chasing too few goods, and the result would invariably be inflation. And inflation is the most iniquitous form of taxation which hurts the poor the most. And that is why he suggested a modified gold standard. Nobody paid any attention to that. Then in 1926, when Dr. Ambedkar was back with his higher education, there was a very important commission that was sent to India by the British government, and that was called Hilton Young Commission. What was the mandate of the Hilton Young Commission? The mandate of Hilton Young Commission was to decide what should be the shape and form of the central bank of the country. Reserve Bank was to be created, and when the Hilton Young Commission came here, they met lots of people, lots of experts. One of the most important testimony that was given before Hilton Young Commission in Mumbai was by Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. Babasaheb Ambedkar at that time gave a testimony in which he made an argument which we took 70 years to understand. I'll just tell you the essence of that. What Dr. Ambedkar was saying was this, that when this Reserve Bank is created as the central bank of the country, impose some limits on the extent of credit that would be extended by the Reserve Bank of India to the central government. If there is no limit, on the credit that is extended by the Reserve Bank of India to the central government, there would be unbridled, uncontrolled expansion of liquidity, and that will lead to inflation. Again, nobody listened to that at that time. 70 years later, in 1993, there was an agreement between the Reserve Bank of India and the Government of India, Ministry of Finance, and that agreement was to phase out central government's dependence on the credit extended by the Reserve Bank of India, which means that what Dr. Ambedkar was saying in 1926-27 became important part of the Reserve Bank of India, which came into existence in 1935. 1st April 1935, the Reserve Bank of India came into existence, but it took them 60 more years to understand what Dr. Ambedkar was saying. And even when they accepted 65 years later that Dr. Ambedkar was right and they were wrong, nobody has given credit to Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar for proposing what he had done in 1926 and 27. This was the great vision of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. After Dr. Babasaheb came to India, I'm following the chronological order. The first thing that he did in 1924 was to formulate his first social organization, and that was Bahishkrut Hitakarini Sabha. The basic motto of that Bahishkrut Hitakarini Sabha was educate, organize and agitate. Shika, Sangatit Hua and Sangharsha Kara. This was the basic motto of that social organization, and what he launched was a struggle for equality, and that was two specific occasions were chosen. One was Mahad Satyagraha in Mahad, to have access to the public reservoir of water, Chaudar Tade, Sangharsha as it is known. After that, he formulated and implemented a temple entry movement at Kalaram Temple in Nashik. That is what was done in 1931. So for 10 years, first 10 years, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar tried to change the Hindu religion by remaining within that religion. However, by 1935, he was frustrated and he felt that he is not going to be able to bring about the change that he was looking for. And therefore, in 1935, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar announced that he was a born Hindu untouchable and he had no option, he had no choice. He could not help it. But he said, although I am a born Hindu, I am not going to die a Hindu. In other words, he made the announcement about conversion in 1935 and then waited for 21 long years. At the end of his life in 1956, on 14th October 1956, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar actually led to the conversion. He converted himself and led 600,000 to 700,000 people to Buddhism. This was an epoch-making event. Please understand the importance of this. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, just look at the enormity. We talked about Buddhism now. Please understand the reasons why he has accepted Buddhism. First, think about Buddhism as a religion which came from the Indian soil. This was very important. Just imagine if Dr. Ambedkar had taken all of us to some other religion coming from some other soil, some other country, what could have become the future of our country? It would have been enormously complicated, one. And second, the basic tenets of Buddhism were very appealing and which were reflected in the Indian Constitution: liberty, equality, fraternity, and social justice. Dr. Ambedkar, this was the basis of Buddhism that made an appeal to his mind, his conscience. That is reflected in the Constitution, and this is something which to which Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was attracted. He actually went on record to say that liberty, equality, and fraternity. I have not taken these principles from the French Revolution as people believe. I have taken these principles from Buddhism, from the Buddhist philosophy. This is why Babasaheb Ambedkar, and this conversion was very important because the world history has seen many conversions. Conversions have taken place all the time. But this conversion was unique. All conversions, all major conversions have always taken place either under the fear of sword or a gun, or they have taken place with some monetary incentive. This was one conversion where on the word, on the appeal of one individual, 700,000 people relinquished their religion and accepted a new religion. I believe there is no parallel in the world history for what Dr. Ambedkar achieved in 1956. The other aspects of Dr. Ambedkar's personality, as I told you, he was a trained economist. Going on further, in 1942, Babasaheb Ambedkar was suddenly inducted in the British ministry. They did not call it ministry, it was called the Viceroy's Executive Council. Now, this was the time when Mahatma Gandhi had announced Chale Jao, Quit India movement, and in the same month, July 1942, Dr. Ambedkar was inducted in the cabinet. What was the charge that he had in the Viceroy's Executive Council? He had 5 departments. Today, there are 15 ministries covering those departments. First, he had labor and employment. Second, he had electricity. Third, he had water management. Fourth, he had PWD, Public Works Department. And fifth, he had minerals management. So coal and everything under minerals management. What is the contribution that he made? Phenomenal contribution. Dr. Ambedkar was not only a learned economist, he was also a great economic administrator. Just look at some of the things that he has done. Before the delivery, pre-delivery leave, paid leave, all those labor reforms were done by nobody other than Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. And most people do not know that. Most women do not do that. It is really a great unfortunate thing is that most people don't know about it. Then other ministries, he did great work in terms of the other ministries as well, electricity, water management. Do you know that there was a lot of discussion about connecting the rivers? The first experiment of connecting rivers, which was actually done in Bihar and Orissa, it was done by Dr. Ambedkar. And the Central Water Commission, which is functioning even today, the foundation of that was laid by Dr. Ambedkar as the minister. Even the mineral management, the policy for mineral management was laid out for the first time by Dr. Ambedkar. And big dams, Hirakud Dam and Hirakud Dam as well as Damodar Valley project was completely commissioned and delivered by Dr. Ambedkar as the minister. So Dr. Ambedkar was not only a bookish economist, he was a great economic administrator par excellence. So that is yet another facet of Dr. Ambedkar's personality. One more facet that I must talk about which strangely very little is known, is that toward the end of his life, Dr. Ambedkar wrote many books on many subjects. We have no time to go over all of that, but two facets on which I want to talk about, because there is a question in the mind of some people, or some people have been deliberately raising that, about the Constitution. You know, there are people in our country, Arun Shauri and so many others, who have questioned, how can one man write the Constitution? And they are trying to deny the credit to Babasaheb Ambedkar. Let us understand what the facts are. First of all, Dr. Ambedkar was never chosen for the Constituent Assembly from the Bombay province. The Congress government at that time made sure that he doesn't get elected from the Congress party, from the Mumbai province. So what he did was, he got elected to Constituent Assembly from Bengal on the support of Muslim League, and he entered the Constituent Assembly. In Constituent Assembly, he was a member of many committees. But then a stage came when he was invited. The first meeting of the Constituent Assembly took place in December 1946, so 7-8 months before our independence. In that meeting, suddenly after Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's initial presentation, suddenly Ambedkar was called to speak about. And Rajendra Prasad was in the chair, and Kakasaheb Gadgil later wrote that we were told to hoot out Dr. Ambedkar, and we were all ready to hoot him out. But Dr. Ambedkar spoke so brilliantly on that day, as he always did, that he has written, Kakasaheb Gadgil has written, that we came to hoot him out, and before we realized, we were standing and giving him a standing ovation. That is when they realized that here was a man. You know, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru had selected a foreigner, a Englishman, Austin something was his name, to write the Constitution. But Mahatma Gandhi took a view that this is something which has to be done by an Indian, and when we have a person like Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, we don't need anybody else. And that is how Babasaheb Ambedkar not only became the first law minister of our country, but he also became the principal architect of the Indian Constitution. What is his contribution as the principal architect of the Indian Constitution? He served on many committees and made great contribution. But to my mind, the biggest contribution, the drafting committee had 7 members. 2 of them were perpetually ill, 1 of them was always abroad, and others were also not getting time to come. So the entire responsibility of actually drafting the Constitution fell on the feeble shoulders of Dr. Ambedkar. He was not well, mind you, but still he worked 16 to 18 hours every day to write the Constitution. That is a great contribution by itself. But to my mind, bigger contribution is piloting that Constitution. Remember that in the Constituent Assembly, there were 292 best minds in our country were together. And we all know in the cooperative housing society where we stay, on a trivial issue like raising the salary of lift man, there is a debate for 4 hours, 5 hours. Here, they were talking about the future of the entire nation. And 292 most brilliant people were together. And it was Dr. Ambedkar who took 3,772 amendments. Each of the amendment was discussed. And do you know something? While formulating the Indian Constitution, it was not decided by majority. It was decided by unanimity. And it was Ambedkar's great task to take every provision, discuss both sides, conduct the discussion of the 292 most brilliant minds, and come to an agreement, form a consensus. Now that was a horrendous task, and it was only Dr. Ambedkar who could do it. And Dr. Rajendra Prasad on the day when the Constitution was submitted and approved, he said that last 3.5 years sitting in this chair as the chairman of the Constituent Assembly, I've been watching the great work done by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, and we realized how correct was the choice that we had made in selecting him as the chairman of the drafting committee, and nobody else could have possibly done what Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar has achieved. If still some people are raising objection, I think you have to think about them, or not think about them, just ignore them. This is the reality. One final point that I want to consider and place before you is the great role that Dr. Ambedkar played in terms of the linguistic reorganization of Indian states. Very little is known about it. For example, when the talk of Maharashtra started, earlier there was a united province of Mumbai, where Gujarat, and today's Maharashtra, and part of Karnataka they were all together. And they decided, when the talk about Maharashtra started, at that time, it was Dr. Ambedkar, all the Gujarati speaking intellectuals, including C.N. Vakil of Mumbai University, and Professor Datwala and Professor Ghiwala, they raised many objections, and the objections were that Mumbai should not be part of Maharashtra, and they made forceful argument. The only person, nobody else, the only person who gave pointed reply to all the objections defending why Mumbai should be in Maharashtra was none other than Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. And when the reorganization of the state started, there was a Fazal Ali Commission that was appointed. They published their report in 1955. What was the basic principle that was used by Fazal Ali Commission? They said, one language, one state. Now it looks simple enough. It looks innocuous enough that one language, one state. It looks perfectly natural. Everybody accepted that, not Babasaheb Ambedkar. Babasaheb Ambedkar said this is wrong. One language, one state is incorrect principle. It should be the other way around. One state, one language. Is this only play of words? No. See the prophetic vision of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. He said that if you make it one language, one state, in north part of India, we will have fewer states which are big in size because of the Hindi belt. So there would be bigger states, small in number but bigger in size. Whereas in south of India, there would be many states but small in size. And this would pave the way, he said, for a possible conflict between north of India and the south of India. See that vision that he had. And therefore he proposed that there should be small states based on the economic criterion, and the principle should be one state, one language for the cultural unity. But it should not be one language, one state. He specifically recommended bifurcation of Bihar, bifurcation of central province. Both of these have happened. Bihar was divided into Bihar and Jharkhand, and central province was divided into Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. He also had recommended trifurcation of Uttar Pradesh, which has not happened. Mayawati tried, but it has not happened. And he also had recommended that the capital of our country should not be confined only to Delhi. There should be a second capital, and that should be in south. And he recommended that the second capital of our country should be in Hyderabad, and that would be required for cultural integration of the country. So he was a visionary who looked beyond everything. If you look at his contribution, his contribution is spread out in so many different walks of life. What is the basic principle of his contribution? What is the common theme running through his entire contribution? I think the theme running through all his contribution can be summarized in 4 words of Buddhism. Bahujana Hitaya, Bahujana Sukhaya. The greatest good for the largest number of people. Everything that Dr. Ambedkar recommended was aimed at the greatest good for largest number of people. Bahujana Hitaya, Bahujana Sukhaya. That was the basic principle of Buddhism that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar followed. And therefore, when we look at the enormity of the contribution that Babasaheb Ambedkar made, I have to say that we as a society, we as a nation, we have done ourselves a great disservice by not taking cognizance of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and his thoughts. By branding him only as the leader of Dalits, by branding him as only the constitution maker, by ignoring his thoughts, we have done irreparable damage to ourselves. And, you know, in 1951, when Dr. Ambedkar resigned, why did he resign? This was one small aspect I'll take. Can I take 2 more minutes? Okay, okay. This is an aspect, you know, when you ask a question, what is the man, who are the champions of man-woman equality? When you ask this question, you will find that the usual names, which are right, Mahatma Phule and many other names will come. Nobody will take Babasaheb Ambedkar's name. Do you know that it was Babasaheb Ambedkar who relinquished his cabinet minister's job for the man-woman equality? No women's organization I have ever seen giving credit of that to Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. I must tell you what had happened. As an independent India's first law minister, for 3.5 years, he championed the Hindu Code Bill. What was the Hindu Code Bill? Don't go by the name Hindu Code Bill, that is confusing. Basically, it was a revolutionary social bill that he was talking about, and it was a bill where, under which women were supposed to get share in their father's property. Women were supposed to get share in their husband's property if the husband died. There was a provision for intercaste marriage and so on. So this was basically about the emancipation of women in our country. And strange thing happened. In the beginning, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru had said that even if our government comes down, we don't care, but we will get this through. But strangely enough, the orthodoxy, the Sanatanis of Congress party came together with the Sanatanis and orthodoxies of the opposition. They all came together, they all ganged up together and defeated that bill. And in protest, therefore, in September 1951, Dr. Ambedkar resigned from his cabinet post, but nobody gives him credit for the man-woman equality. Everything that he was saying has come out true. That has happened in the due course. But at that time, there was so much opposition. Rajendra Prasad of Congress party, as the President of India, wrote a strong letter against it to the then Prime Minister. Panditji had promised that we will get it through, but later on, he buckled under the pressure from the Congress as well as the orthodoxy of the opposition party. They all ganged up and it was defeated, and that is why Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar resigned. While resigning, he also said, he gave the main reasons given was Hindu Code Bill, of course, but then there are other reasons. Do you know that with Dr. Ambedkar's so much experience in planning economic development, in the 5 ministries, 5 departments that he was holding in the British government, it would have been very natural with his background, with his erudite scholarship, it would have been natural for the country to choose Babasaheb Ambedkar as the finance minister of the country, or at least as the chairman of the planning commission of our country. He was promised that he would be made chairman or deputy chairman of the planning commission, but that did not happen. And he had actually mentioned in the resignation letter that I was kept away from all the economic development, all economic and financial portfolios, and I was promised to the position as the chief of the planning commission. That was also not done. I want to say that as an economist, I am saying this, not as an Ambedkar Premi, not as a follower of Babasaheb Ambedkar. As an economist, I want to say here in this great audience that if Dr. Ambedkar had become the finance minister of our country, if Dr. Ambedkar had become the chairman of the planning commission of our country, the future of our country would have been completely different than what it is today. We would not have to worry about Achhe Din Kab Aayenge. Achhe Din would have been there. And that's why I think we are doing ourselves a great disservice by not taking cognizance of the great thoughts of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. And that is why I really appreciate my friend Rajkumar Badoleji and his colleagues for taking this initiative to bring together experts to talk about different aspects of Babasaheb Ambedkar's thoughts and philosophy. I once again congratulate Rajkumar Badoli ji and his colleagues for organizing this conference so well. And I congratulate all of you for participating in this great conference. And I wish you all the very best. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I now request Shri Rajkumar Badoli ji, Minister for Social Justice and Special Assistance, to felicitate Dr. Narendra Jadhav. And I shall also request Dr. Sandesh Wag, Coordinator of International Conference of Government of Maharashtra, to give a bouquet to Shri R.K. Gaikwad, Senior IAS Officer, former Commissioner of Social Welfare and former Secretary, Minority Development, Government of Maharashtra.